It was a warm evening in a quiet suburban neighborhood, where the usual sounds of daily life were now fading as the sun set. Officer Sarah Daniels, a seasoned police officer, had just finished her shift. Her partner, Max, a highly trained German shepherd, sat quietly in the backseat of her patrol car, eyes alert. Max was known for his sharp instincts and his ability to detect danger. Together, they had worked countless cases, and today had been just like any other, until it wasn't. Officer Daniels was on a routine patrol, driving down familiar streets she had traveled countless times. Max was calm, as usual, but his ears perked up as they passed a certain street. Something felt different. A few blocks away, a car was parked by the side of the road, and there were figures in the yard. Officer Daniels squinted into the distance and saw a tall man stepping out of a car. He appeared to be a well-dressed officer, someone she didn't recognize, and standing next to him was an imposing figure, a man who looked like a soldier. That soldier was General Tyrone Thompson, one of the most respected figures in the U.S. Army with a long history of service to his country. General Thompson had come home after a long day of meetings. He had served in several military operations, and his leadership was admired by his peers. Little did he know, his return to his home that evening would end in tragedy. The situation quickly escalated. Officer Daniels had stopped her patrol car at the end of the street, her gaze now fixed on the figures ahead. Something didn't feel right. She had noticed that the man she saw earlier, the general, was acting nervous, glancing around as though he had seen something unsettling. She didn't know why, but a strange feeling crept into her thoughts. Before she could make any further judgment, Max growled softly in the backseat. The sudden sound sent a ripple of unease through Officer Daniels. She stepped out of her car, calling Max to her side. Without warning, Max sprinted toward the figure of General Thompson. Officer Daniels, frantic, yelled after him to stop, but it was too late. Max, who had been trained to assist in high-risk situations, had already lunged toward the general, his instincts kicking in. Officer Daniels rushed forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She was screaming at Max to release him, but the dog's training took over. General Thompson, clearly in shock and fear, tried to fight off the attack, but the situation turned chaotic. In the confusion, Officer Daniels was finally able to pull Max off the general, but the damage was done. The general lay on the ground, unresponsive. Her hands trembled as she reached for her radio, calling for backup. The thought of what had just happened hit her like a tidal wave. The general, a man of great stature and a hero to many, was gone in an instant. Officer Daniels dropped to her knees beside him, her mind racing. How could this have happened? She had always trusted Max, but never in her wildest dreams did she think he would react in such a way. Max had been trained to protect and assist, but the unexpected escalation led to a fatal outcome. As the sirens approached in the distance, Officer Daniels felt like the world around her was crumbling. She couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. The death of General Thompson had sent shockwaves through the community, and Officer Daniels knew that her life would never be the same. At that moment, standing in the dimming light, Officer Daniels realized that this wasn't just an ordinary night. This was a tragedy that would forever change not only her life but the lives of many others. She couldn't undo what had happened, but she would have to live with the consequences of this terrible, unexpected event. The story of that tragic evening would soon unfold, bringing with it questions about law enforcement, race, and responsibility. But for now, Officer Daniels could only sit there, looking at the man who had once served his country with honor, now lost forever in a moment of chaos. The news spread fast. Within minutes of the tragic event, sirens blared through the neighborhood, alerting the nearby residents that something serious had happened. Officer Daniels stood frozen next to General Thompson, still kneeling beside him, her hands trembling. She was in a state of shock, trying to comprehend what had just occurred. Her thoughts raced, but there was one thing she couldn't shake: the image of the general lying on the ground, motionless. Paramedics arrived quickly, but it was clear that the general had already passed. The suddenness of it all left everyone in disbelief. How could this have happened? Officer Daniels couldn't understand it herself. She had never expected her K-9 partner, Max, to act with such aggression. The dog was trained to protect and assist, not to cause harm. But somehow something went terribly wrong. As the police officers and emergency responders worked to secure the scene, Officer Daniels was pulled aside by her sergeant. His face was stern, and he spoke in a calm but firm voice. "Sarah, I need you to stay with me," he said. "We'll handle the investigation. But right now, I need you to get checked out and answer some questions." The officer felt numb. Her mind was racing, but she could hardly form any coherent thoughts. She didn't know what to say. How could she explain this? How could she explain what had happened between her dog and a man of such high rank in the military? She couldn't make sense of it. General Thompson's family was soon notified. The news hit them hard, especially his daughter, Maya Thompson. Maya had always known her father to be a man of great strength, a man who had served his country with pride and dedication. To hear that he had been taken so suddenly, in such an unexpected way, was unbearable. Maya had been living in another city, focused on her career, but as soon as she heard the news, she made her way to the scene. The journey was long and filled with overwhelming thoughts of her father. She couldn't believe it. It didn't make sense. How could someone like her father, a decorated U.S. Army general, meet such a tragic end? It felt wrong. It felt unjust. When Maya arrived, she saw the chaos around her. The police, the paramedics, the flashing lights. It was all so surreal. She pushed through the crowd, desperate to get closer, to understand what had happened. When she finally reached the scene, she saw the lifeless body of her father being placed in an ambulance. Her emotions were all over the place. Anger, confusion, sadness. It was all too much to take in at once. As she stood there, her mind was in a whirlwind of questions. How could a police officer's dog have attacked her father? Was this an accident? Or was there more to the story than she realized? The police began questioning Officer Daniels, asking her for details about the events leading up to the incident. They wanted to know everything. What had caused Max to attack? Was there a trigger? Officer Daniels explained as best as she could, recounting the moment when her dog had reacted so unexpectedly. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew she needed to help the investigation in any way she could. Still, she couldn't shake the guilt. No matter how many times she replayed the events in her head, she couldn't understand why it had happened. Maya, too, was determined to understand. As the days passed, she began to dig deeper, questioning those around her. Her father's life and legacy were now overshadowed by his tragic death, and she needed answers. She began looking into Officer Daniels and her K-9 partner, Max, trying to uncover any connections or details that could explain what had gone wrong that day. What she found was something she never expected, a link between her father's past and Officer Daniels. Maya's investigation revealed a hidden connection. Her father, General Thompson, had been involved in a number of high-level FBI cases, and one of those cases had ties to Officer Daniels' family. Maya was stunned. She hadn't known the details before, but now the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. The news of General Tyrone Thompson's death quickly spread beyond the local neighborhood. The tragedy became a nationwide headline. Social media buzzed with discussions, opinions, and debates. The story of a respected U.S. Army general being fatally attacked by a police officer's K-9 was hard to comprehend. People were shocked, confused, and angry. How could such an incident happen? Was it an accident, or something more? The public demanded answers. The media took hold of the story, broadcasting updates every hour. The image of General Thompson, a war hero with decades of service, lying lifeless on the ground, struck a chord with the American public. His death didn't just touch his family. It touched the hearts of everyone who admired his courage and dedication. People began asking questions about the actions of Officer Sarah Daniels and her dog, Max. Was Max, the K-9, acting on his own instinct, Or was there something more to the story? Racial tensions were also stirred. General Thompson was black, and Officer Daniels was white. Many in the community began to wonder if race had played a role in the tragic event. Some saw the incident as a reflection of the larger issues surrounding police practices, particularly when it came to interactions between law enforcement and black citizens. Protests erupted in several cities, with people demanding justice for General Thompson and for answers about the role of the police in his death. Officer Daniels was caught in the middle of this storm. As a law enforcement officer, she had always believed in upholding the law and protecting people. She never thought that one tragic mistake could change everything. She was a police officer, not someone who would willingly harm another person, let alone a hero like General Thompson. But now, the pressure from the public was immense. Some demanded that she be held accountable, while others expressed sympathy, unsure of the full circumstances surrounding the incident. Maya Thompson, the general's daughter, found herself at the center of the storm as well. The public looked to her for answers. They expected her to speak on behalf of her father and to demand justice. But Maya wasn't sure what to believe yet. She had her suspicions, but she knew she needed time to process everything. The last thing she wanted was to jump to conclusions without knowing the full truth. As Maya spent her days dealing with the emotional aftermath of her father's death, she also began to face the reality of the pressure mounting on her. People in her community wanted answers. They wanted her to speak out, to tell the world how she felt, to make a statement. But Maya didn't feel ready. She needed time to grieve and to find out more about what had truly happened. The investigation continued, but with every passing day, the public's opinion seemed to shift. Some people believed Officer Daniels was responsible for her dog's actions, while others questioned whether there was more to the story. The pressure on Officer Daniels grew as she tried to defend herself. She knew that the public wanted to know why her K-9 had attacked General Thompson, but even she couldn't explain it. She had trained Max for years, and he had never acted this way before. Something had gone wrong, and she needed to understand why. The media coverage became more intense, and soon, Officer Daniels was forced to make a public statement. She stood before the cameras, her hands shaking, her voice wavering. She spoke about her relationship with Max, about the years they had spent working together, and how deeply she regretted the outcome of that day. She acknowledged the pain and the heartache that General Thompson's family was experiencing. But she also said she didn't know what had caused Max to react in such a violent way. All she could offer was her apologies. Despite her words, the public's opinion remained divided. Some people felt that Officer Daniels had done her best to explain what had happened, but others felt she was avoiding responsibility. The racial aspects of the case added another layer of complexity to the situation. Was this simply an accident, or was it a reflection of deeper issues within law enforcement? The debate raged on, and both Officer Daniels and Maya Thompson found themselves at the center of it. The days after General Tyrone Thompson's death felt like they were moving in slow motion for Maya Thompson. The pain of losing her father was overwhelming, but what weighed even heavier on her heart was the confusion. She couldn't accept that a routine encounter with a police officer's K-9 had ended so tragically. Maya's mind couldn't stop asking the same question. Why did this happen? As she tried to process the loss, Maya began to look deeper into the incident. She had grown up hearing stories about her father's career and his service in the army. He had always been a man of honor, a man who valued justice and fairness. But now, there was a question of justice that needed to be answered, and Maya wasn't going to let it go unanswered. She knew she had to learn everything she could about the officer involved, Officer Sarah Daniels, and the K-9, Max. Maya began to dig into the background of Officer Daniels, hoping to find some clue, some answer that could explain the behavior of Max. What Maya didn't expect to discover was that her father, General Thompson, had a connection to Officer Daniels' family that went back years. The more she uncovered, the more stunned she became. Maya learned that her father had once been involved in a high-level investigation with the FBI, and that investigation had ties to Officer Daniels' family. Her father's role in the FBI case was not widely known, but Maya found old records that showed how her father had worked alongside the FBI to investigate law enforcement corruption. Officer Daniels' family, it seemed, had played a part in that investigation. Maya had never known this side of her father's work. She had always seen him as a military hero, a man who served with pride and dignity. But now, she realized there was more to her father's life than she had ever known. The discovery was shocking, but it also raised even more questions. Why hadn't her father told her about his work with the FBI? What was the connection between Officer Daniels' family and her father's investigations? The deeper Maya went into the records, the more questions she had. She found out that the case her father had worked on had involved several law enforcement officers, including some from Officer Daniels' department. The investigation had been about corruption within certain police departments, and it had been a sensitive issue. Maya had never heard her father mention this case, and it made her wonder if he had kept it from her for a reason. Had he been trying to protect her from the dangerous world of police corruption? Maya's mind raced as she tried to piece everything together. The more she learned, the more complicated the situation seemed. She didn't know if this hidden connection between her father and Officer Daniels' family was important to the death of General Thompson, but she couldn't ignore it. Maya knew she had to confront the truth, even if it meant digging into painful family secrets. Officer Daniels, meanwhile, was struggling with her own demons. She had never imagined that her K-9, Max, would be involved in such a tragedy. Max had always been a trusted partner, and the thought that something had gone terribly wrong was too much for her to bear. Officer Daniels had spent years training Max, developing a close bond with him. She had always believed in his abilities and in the deep trust they had built. So when the attack happened, she couldn't understand why it had occurred. She knew the pressure was mounting on her. The investigation was ongoing, and the public was demanding answers. But the more she thought about it, the more Officer Daniels felt like something wasn't right. She had been part of law enforcement for many years, and she knew that the truth wasn't always as simple as it seemed. As she struggled to make sense of everything, she began to suspect that there was more to the story than just an unfortunate accident. As the days passed after the tragic death of General Tyrone Thompson, Maya found herself drawn deeper into her investigation. She couldn't stop thinking about the strange connection between her father's past and Officer Sarah Daniels' family. The more she uncovered, the more confused and curious she became. She had always known her father as a military hero, a man who fought for justice, but now she was learning there were parts of his life that had been hidden from her. Maya had discovered that her father had once worked with the FBI on an important investigation, one that involved corruption within law enforcement agencies. The more she dug, the clearer it became that Officer Daniels' family was somehow connected to that investigation. Her father had never told her about the details of his work with the FBI, and it left Maya wondering why. Was it to protect her from the dangerous side of his job, or was there something else going on? Maya's questions only grew as she uncovered more records and documents. She learned that Officer Daniels' father had once been a part of the FBI's task force investigating law enforcement corruption. Her father, General Thompson, had worked with the task force in some capacity, though the specifics were still unclear. This connection between their families went back years, and Maya couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow linked to her father's death. Maya's emotions were mixed. She was angry, confused, and heartbroken. Her father had been a man of honor, someone who had devoted his life to serving his country, yet she was now discovering that his work had led him into a world of secrecy and hidden agendas. She had always trusted her father, but now she wasn't sure if she knew the whole truth about him. The more Maya thought about it, the more she realized that the answers she was looking for weren't going to come easily. She needed to speak with Officer Daniels and get her side of the story. There was too much at stake, and Maya couldn't move forward without understanding what had really happened that day. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she was determined to find out the truth, no matter what it took. Officer Daniels, on the other hand, was struggling to make sense of everything. She had always trusted Max, her K-9 partner, but the events of that day had shaken her to her core. How could something like this happen? She had trained Max for years, and he had always been a loyal and well-behaved dog. Yet on that fateful day, he had attacked General Thompson without warning. As Officer Daniels worked through her own feelings of guilt and confusion, she couldn't ignore the growing sense that there was more to the situation than just an accident. She had always believed in the good of the police force, but now she was beginning to question everything. Her family's connection to the FBI and the investigation into law enforcement corruption had never been something she thought about. But now, it seemed that the past was catching up with her, and it was all tied to the death of General Thompson. Officer Daniels felt torn. She wanted to protect her career and her reputation, but she also knew that the truth needed to come out. She needed to understand why Max had reacted the way he did and what role, if any, her family's past played in the tragedy. The pressure was mounting, and she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that the incident wasn't as simple as it seemed. Maya and Officer Daniels were now on separate but parallel paths. Maya had uncovered a hidden link between her father's past and Officer Daniels' family, and she was determined to uncover the truth. Officer Daniels, meanwhile, was coming to terms with the idea that there was something more to the incident than she had realized. Both women were seeking answers, but neither knew where their searches would lead. As Maya reached out to Officer Daniels, she knew that their meeting would be tense. Maya had questions that needed to be answered, and Officer Daniels had her own struggles to face. The investigation was far from over, and the truth was still elusive. But one thing was clear: both women were searching for the same thing: justice and understanding. Maya couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper at play, something connected to the investigation her father had been part of years ago. She was determined to find the truth, but she also knew that the journey ahead would be filled with difficult conversations, painful realizations, and hard decisions. The days following Maya Thompson's meeting with Officer Sarah Daniels were filled with an uneasy silence. The tension that had built up between them during their conversation lingered, but there was a shift in the air. Maya had gotten some answers, but many questions still remained. She knew that uncovering the full truth would take time, and she wasn't sure she was ready to face everything that might come to light. Yet one thing was certain: she would not stop until she found the justice her father deserved. The investigation into General Tyrone Thompson's death was still ongoing. Officer Daniels had been cleared of any intentional wrongdoing, but the case was far from closed. The question of why her K-9, Max, had acted so aggressively was still unanswered, and the connection between her father's past with the FBI and the events leading up to General Thompson's death was a mystery they both needed to solve. Officer Daniels had promised to help Maya find the truth, but she knew that their path forward was uncertain. Maya's life had changed completely since her father's death. The grief was still fresh, but there was a growing sense of responsibility within her. She had started to piece together the details of her father's hidden life, and with each new discovery, the questions only deepened. Why had he kept so much of his work with the FBI a secret? What had he been involved in that made it so important to hide the truth? And most importantly, what role had Officer Daniels' family played in everything that had happened? Despite the pain and confusion, Maya found herself more determined than ever to uncover the full story. She knew her father's legacy deserved more than just an unanswered death. She had to find out what had really happened, even if the truth was difficult to face. As she continued to dig, she realized that the connections between her father's work with the FBI and Officer Daniels' family ran deeper than she could have imagined. As for Officer Daniels, she too found herself in a difficult position. The weight of General Thompson's death hung over her, but there was more at play than just her role in the tragic incident. Her own family's history with law enforcement corruption had come to light, and it was something that she couldn't ignore. The events of the past had a way of resurfacing, and Officer Daniels knew that her involvement in the investigation would have lasting consequences. She couldn't help but feel a deep sense of guilt. She had always trusted her K-9 partner, Max, But that trust had been shattered when Max had attacked General Thompson. Officer Daniels had never wanted anything like this to happen. She had spent years building her career and working to serve her community, but now she was questioning everything she had known. Was there more to the incident than just an accident? Had the events of her family's past somehow influenced Max's behavior? These questions haunted her as she navigated the aftermath of the tragedy. Despite her own doubts, Officer Daniels felt a responsibility to help Maya find answers. She knew that the truth was out there, and that both of them needed to confront it. Maya had lost her father, and Officer Daniels had lost the sense of certainty she once had about herself and her career. Together, they were trying to make sense of something that didn't seem to have a clear explanation. Their paths had crossed in a way neither of them could have predicted, and now they would have to face the fallout together. The public's reaction to the incident was still divided. Some saw Officer Daniels as a victim of an unfortunate accident, while others viewed her as part of a larger system of law enforcement that needed to be held accountable. The media coverage continued, and both Officer Daniels and Maya found themselves in the spotlight. It was difficult to escape the weight of public opinion, but they both knew they had to keep pushing forward. They had to keep searching for the truth, no matter where it led. The pressure of the situation was beginning to weigh heavily on both Maya Thompson and Officer Sarah Daniels. For Maya, the grief of losing her father, General Tyrone Thompson, was still fresh. Yet, beneath her sadness, there was a growing sense of determination. The more she uncovered about her father's hidden life, the more she believed that his death was not a simple accident. There were too many unanswered questions, too many things that didn't add up. She needed justice, not only for her father, but for the truth that seemed to be buried beneath layers of secrecy. Maya couldn't stop thinking about the connection between her father's work with the FBI and Officer Daniels' family. This revelation was too significant to ignore. Maya knew she had to learn more about Officer Daniels' role in the tragedy. She had to speak to the officer directly and confront her with the facts she had uncovered. Maya believed that the answers were out there, and she would do whatever it took to find them. Officer Daniels, meanwhile, was feeling the strain of being at the center of the storm. She had always been a dedicated police officer, someone who believed in protecting her community and doing what was right. But now, the entire situation seemed to be spiraling out of control. Her K-9 partner, Max, had attacked and killed a man who had been a respected hero. There were no simple answers, and every step she took felt like she was walking deeper into a web of confusion. She couldn't deny the pressure from the public. People were demanding justice, and the media were eager for answers. The entire department was under scrutiny, and Officer Daniels couldn't help but feel like she was caught in the middle. She knew she had to take responsibility for her actions, but at the same time, she wasn't sure what had gone wrong. Max had been a loyal partner for years, and his sudden aggression toward General Thompson left her puzzled. She couldn't understand it, but she needed to figure out why it had happened. As the investigation into General Thompson's death continued, Officer Daniels found herself questioning the very foundation of everything she had worked for. The revelations about her family's connection to the FBI, the corruption investigation her father had been a part of, it all felt like it was tied together in ways that she couldn't yet understand. Was her family's past somehow influencing the tragic events of today? Officer Daniels was beginning to feel the weight of both her own guilt and the complex web of connections that had led to this point. One afternoon, as Maya sat in her apartment, sifting through the documents she had gathered, she decided it was time. Time to meet Officer Daniels, to confront her and try to understand the events that had led to her father's death. She needed answers, and she knew that only by speaking directly to the officer could she hope to find them. Maya arranged a meeting with Officer Daniels, feeling a mix of nervousness and resolve. The day of the meeting, she arrived at a small coffee shop, the place they had agreed on. She waited, her heart racing. She knew that this conversation would be difficult, but she was ready. She had to know what had happened. Why had Officer Daniels' dog attacked her father? Was it just an accident, or was there more to the story? Officer Daniels walked in, her expression somber. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew this conversation was long overdue. She had heard about Maya's investigation, and she understood the anger and confusion that Maya must have been feeling. The death of her father had shattered Maya's world, and Officer Daniels was ready to face whatever questions she had. They sat down at a small table, both of them quiet for a moment. Maya was the first to speak, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I need to understand why my father is gone," Maya said, her eyes meeting Officer Daniels. "I need to know why it happened. Was it just a mistake, or is there something more that you're not telling me?" Officer Daniels looked at Maya, her own heart heavy with guilt and confusion. She hadn't wanted any of this to happen, but she knew she had to be honest. "I don't know why Max acted the way he did," Officer Daniels said quietly. "I've worked with him for years, and he's always been loyal and well-trained. But that day, everything changed. I wish I could explain it, but I can't. I don't have all the answers, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for your loss." Maya nodded, feeling a mix of emotions. She could see the pain in Officer Daniels' eyes, and part of her felt sympathy. But the other part of her, the part that missed her father deeply, was still angry, still confused. She needed more. The days following Maya Thompson's meeting with Officer Sarah Daniels were filled with an uneasy silence. The tension that had built up between them during their conversation lingered, but there was a shift in the air. Maya had gotten some answers, but many questions still remained. She knew that uncovering the full truth would take time, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face everything that might come to light. Yet, one thing was certain. She would not stop until she found the justice her father deserved. The investigation into General Tyrone Thompson's death was still ongoing. Officer Daniels had been cleared of any intentional wrongdoing, but the case was far from closed. The question of why her K-9, Max, had acted so aggressively was still unanswered, and the connection between her father's past with the FBI and the events leading up to General Thompson's death was a mystery they both needed to solve. Officer Daniels had promised to help Maya find the truth, but she knew that their path forward was uncertain. Maya's life had changed completely since her father's death. The grief was still fresh, but there was a growing sense of responsibility within her. She had started to piece together the details of her father's hidden life, and with each new discovery, the questions only deepened. Why had he kept so much of his work with the FBI a secret? What had he been involved in that made it so important to hide the truth? And most importantly, what role had Officer Daniels' family played in everything that had happened? Despite the pain and confusion, Maya found herself more determined than ever to uncover the full story. She knew her father's legacy deserved more than just an unanswered death. She had to find out what had really happened, even if the truth was difficult to face. As she continued to dig, she realized that the connections between her father's work with the FBI and Officer Daniels' family ran deeper than she could have imagined. As for Officer Daniels, she too found herself in a difficult position. The weight of General Thompson's death hung over her, but there was more at play than just her role in the tragic incident. Her own family's history with law enforcement corruption had come to light, and it was something that she couldn't ignore. The events of the past had a way of resurfacing, and Officer Daniels knew that her involvement in the investigation would have lasting consequences. She couldn't help but feel a deep sense of guilt. She had always trusted her K-9 partner, Max, but that trust had been shattered when Max had attacked General Thompson. Officer Daniels had never wanted anything like this to happen. She had spent years building her career and working to serve her community, but now she was questioning everything she had known. Was there more to the incident than just an accident? Had the events of her family's past somehow influenced Max's behavior? These questions haunted her as she navigated the aftermath of the tragedy. Despite her own doubts, Officer Daniels felt a responsibility to help Maya find answers. She knew that the truth was out there, and that both of them needed to confront it. Maya had lost her father, and Officer Daniels had lost the sense of certainty she once had about herself and her career. Together, They were trying to make sense of something that didn't seem to have a clear explanation. Their paths had crossed in a way neither of them could have predicted, and now they would have to face the fallout together. The public's reaction to the incident was still divided. Some saw Officer Daniels as a victim of an unfortunate accident, while others viewed her as part of a larger system of law enforcement that needed to be held accountable. The media coverage continued, and both Officer Daniels and Maya found themselves in the spotlight. It was difficult to escape the weight of public opinion, but they both knew they had to keep pushing forward. They had to keep searching for the truth, no matter where it led.